Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out today to join the MACTE team on this special webinar. We welcome everyone here today. We welcome the speakers. We welcome every of our friends. We welcome our friends from the media. We welcome every one of you to today's special webinar. I am your moderator for today, and my name is Omotoyosi Ajayi. I am the communication specialist for MACTE. You know, a little background on why we have put together this webinar. If you remember, sometimes ago in March 22 to be precise, there was something that was trending on Twitter. It was called Horrible Bosses. TechCabal had released an article that was titled Tyranny in the Workplace. And there were some revelations about certain CEOs and the way they were treating their employees. Because of that, it led to a lot of outrage on social media. It trended for about 2 to 3 days. People across different workplaces in Nigeria started talking about their experiences at the workplace, experiences of harassment, discrimination, all manner of unhealthy practices. And, you know, that got us talking. But you know what we later realized was that after that revelation, nothing happened. We realized that there was nobody to further these conversations. We realized that there was no provisions on ground. So we're saying that, you know, it is one thing to make that kind of revelation, then it's another thing to actually prefer the way out. So we're saying, what exactly is the way out? Where do Nigerian workers turn to when they're experiencing this type of situations? What is the provisions of the law? Who can I speak to? And that is why MACTE, in the spirit of Workers' Day that's coming this weekend, has said, as the leaders, you know, we are in the best position to begin to have these conversations. We're in the best positions to begin to, you know, come out to say, here's what can be done, here's how workplaces should function, here's what's acceptable, and here's what's not acceptable. And that's why we are really here today. At MACTE, you know, we pride ourselves as a leading management consultant firm in Nigeria. We have been providing excellent human resource and consulting services since 1982. So you see, we are uniquely positioned to discuss all things human resources. And that's why we have also partnered with top HR experts that have been in the game for decades. They've been doing very well, and they are also in the right place to help us to understand what's obtainable as a worker in the workplace, as an employee. Today is an opportunity for you to really know your rights at the workplace, know your own responsibilities and know the responsibilities of your employer, know who to turn to when things are not going well, know the next steps to take, and ultimately just ensuring that we're able to create a safe place for each other to work, a healthy work environment where very fair practices take place and where we can ultimately grow and learn. So thank you once again for joining us, and it promises to be a very exciting session. Do stay with us, and as our speakers talk, whatever questions you have, please make sure to drop it in the chat box down below your Zoom screen. At the end of the presentations, we will take all the questions. We look forward to having a very exciting time with you. That being said, I would go straight to introduce our speakers for the day. A very short introduction before we go into the business of the day. Our first speaker for today is Mr. Hussein Udo. Mr. Hussein Udo is a business and HR strategy thought leader and people developer. Mr. Hussein is a C-suite executive. He's an avid community member. He's a community builder. He's a people developer, and he's a mentor. That's something brief about Mr. Hussein that I would like you to know. He's a fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Management, Chartered Management Institute, and he's also a member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. Mr. Hussein, you're welcome here today. We're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on board. We also have Mr. Wale Smart Oyerinde. Mr. Wale Smart is the Deputy Director and Head of Membership Services, Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, also known as NECA. He's a strategic business, membership, and organization growth expert. He has years of experience in human capital and talent management, and he is a business sustainability partner. practitioner. He has been trained by the International Labour Organization and is also a quality management and system auditor. Mr. Wale Smart, thank you so much for joining us today. We do not take this for granted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toyosi. My pleasure being here.
Thank you so much. Our third speaker for today is Mr. Kunle Agbola. Mr. Kunle is the head of outsourcing and business process operation at Macte. He's a human resource professional with over 10 years multifaceted experience in recruitment management, human resources, training and performance management. Mr. Kunle, thank you so much for coming here today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So with that being said, we're going straight into what brings us here today, promoting employee rights in the workplace, the way forward. And our first speaker, Mr. Hussein, is going to be talking for the next 5 to 6 minutes thereabouts on the concept of labor law in Nigeria. I know that even myself personally, we've heard about labor laws, the labor laws in Nigeria, that labor is responsible for safeguarding employee rights in the workplace, and really want to know what is the concept of labor law in Nigeria? What is the purpose of Nigerian labor law? What are the limitations of the labor laws? So I give the floor over to Mr. Hussein as he takes us on the concept of labor law in Nigeria. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Toyosi. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you so very much. Happy Workers' Day in advance to everybody that's on the call. It's still in advance. You are going to enjoy a long weekend. So happy to be sharing this platform with my colleagues. Wale Smart, Sheila, I hope she gets to join us, and Kule. And let me start by acknowledging Toyosi and the great job she's done pulling this together. And a special thanks I have to declare publicly that I do have a special relationship with mommy and daddy, Mrs. Elizabeth Rutimi and Mr. Tayo Rutimi. I don't know if they're on the call, the founder and the chairman. I thank them especially for giving me this platform. And of course, my pal, Tunde Rutimi. Tunde is not on the call, I know already, because I just spoke with him. So thanks everybody for making this happen. Now, this topic is very sensitive in the sense that it requires both tact and balance to be able to do justice to all the parties involved. So the way I would pitch this is, if you remember what I wrote in my post promoting this session, when you know your rights and when the other party knows that you know your rights, they tend to respect you a bit more, and they tend to mess with you a lot less. So the first place, I think the best place to start is for us to try to simplify the legal landscape. Okay, the frameworks that protects workers and workers' rights in Nigeria. The main law in this space is the Nigerian Labour Act, enacted in the 70s. That's the main law that protects the workers' rights. Now, there are other acts that support that. The Trade Dispute Act, for example, the Trade Unions Act, the Factory Act, and the Employees Compensation Act. All these acts go to support the Labour Act. However, one of the main challenges with the Labour Act, which is quite funny, is that the Labour Act uses the term workers. And that has been defined as unskilled and manual labor workers. What that seems to suggest is that executive, admin workers, managerial employees are not protected by the Labour Act, as it's phrased today. Now, this challenge, the way most organizations get rid of, the way this challenge has been dealt with is that when you go to the court of law, and I'm going to talk about that later, the default is to go back or fall back on whatever that company's staff handbook or policy says. So immediately there, you realize what I've just said, which is if you're joining an organization and you are not a petty labor or just what we classify as a worker, then you must become very privy with what their staff policy says and what their handbook says, because that becomes the default that is going to be gone to if there is a dispute. So that is the first challenge with it. The second thing is In terms of if there is an issue, and invariably there will be disputes, there's a hierarchy of steps that you need to go to, and you need to know this to be able to understand your rights and fight for it. One, the company's internal disciplinary committee procedure must be done. There must be evidence that you've gone through the disciplinary procedure. Then such a case then goes to the National Industrial Court of Nigeria. The National Industrial Court of Nigeria is the singular body that's been given the power to apply and to deal with any issues of unfair labor practices. They also can apply international labor organization standards and international best practices if the local standards are not strong enough. Then the Industrial Arbitration Panel, that is the body that has been set up by the Trade Dispute Act, is another unit that can resolve disputes. And if you're not satisfied with that, then you can raise it to the national, the National Industrial Court of Nigeria. And any appeal from there then goes to the Court of Appeal. So that's the legal framework, how things are set up for you to be able to get your rights. Now, I'm going to just go through 2 or 3 major rights that you should be aware of, because I know I have only 6 minutes. There'll be questions later. The first thing you should know is that as a worker, you must be paid in cash. It's a right. Any contract that pays you in kind or pays you part of your benefits in something else other than cash, it's illegal. You must be paid in intervals that does not exceed 1 month. That means you cannot be paid quarterly. You cannot be paid half yearly. So if someone is owing you a salary that exceeds 1 month, they're violating a law. But you can also not be paid in advance in excess of 1 month. The other thing is that you must have a written contract within 3 months max of your starting a job. Written, it must be written within 3 months maximum. You might not get it immediately, but within 3 months of starting, you should have a written contract, or else there's a violation going on right there. The third thing, and I'm sure many people didn't realize this, is that your employer cannot deduct your salary, deduct anything from your salary, unless there's direct evidence that you are responsible for having caused a loss or an injury. If there's no evidence, then no employer can deduct anything from your salary as punishment. It's illegal. Even when there's evidence that you are directly responsible for a loss, there has to be a written approval from somebody that's called a labor officer. That's somebody who works with the Ministry of Labor before such a deduction can happen. Without all that, any deduction from a salary is illegal. Now, even if an employer overpays you a salary, that deduction must happen within 3 months. If all of the deduction of the overpayment doesn't happen within 3 months, they cannot deduct that money. And after 3 months, anything that is not done after 3 months, you can't do it. You cannot force somebody to work for you illegally. You can't force somebody to work for you. Only government can force people to go to work, and that can only happen in the case of an emergency or a calamity. There's freedom of association. It's illegal to prevent people from associating. You can't stop people from joining labor. And we'll talk about rest later. I need to yield the floor. It's 7 minutes already. Just one last thing, Toyosi. Permit me to mention this. The law requires that the workplace be made conducive in all respects for the worker. And lastly, maternity leave, 12 weeks of maternity leave by law is mandatory, it's the law. And Lagos State has now said 10 days of paternity leave within the first 2 months of a baby coming. It's by law, the right of the worker. So that's just a framework. Let me yield the floor. I've already spent more than 7 minutes. I'm timing myself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. I mean, these are really exciting points that you have tabled down. Even though we know that what is obtainable today, the reverse is the case. For example,
this recent contract. And the good thing about the whole thing is the labor standard itself.
I'm sorry about that. I muted that. What we realize today is that some to-be employees, they get different kinds of contracts. Some employers will promise employees visibility in return for the work that they would do. They will say, we don't have cash to pay you, but we can create visibility for you. We can build a good profile for you. You also mentioned something that says that employers do not have the right to make deductions from employees' salary. We have a lot of organizations that make unnecessary deductions. They will say, because you said you were sick and you did not bring a note from the doctor, even in cases where people bring a note, they still find something to say. They say you came 30 minutes late, you resumed 30 minutes late, and so we'll deduct from. So all manner. So my question now is, what are the specific areas that the law addresses when it concerns workers' rights? So we want to see what are the proactive measures that labor law actually takes to, address some of these areas, because we see them happen on a daily basis, and we are saying, is there nobody that can even fight for the Nigerian workers? Who do we actually lodge all of these complaints to? And will they get resolved? Will there be a follow-up? What areas does labor law address? Thank you, sir.
Is that a question to me?
Yes, sir, that's a question to you, sir.
I think, like I said, the National Industrial Court is the first place you go to. Now, I want to assume that you would go through the internal process, lodge it with your HR. Hopefully, the HR of such organization might not do anything. Then you can speak with your legal advisor to go to the National Industrial Court. Now, even before you get there, there are many, again, we'll talk about this later, there are many bodies, NECA is on the forum, that can help you with this. But the National Industrial Court is the logical next step to go to, where you can lodge a complaint. Will it be resolved? I think the best answer to that is a lot of workers don't know their rights, and so don't try to go through the process and assume it doesn't happen. I can cite quite a few, because when in researching and reading for this session, there are quite a few examples of cases, simple cases that have been taken to court, and typically settlements have happened before judgments were given. And when you get settlement before judgment happens, it means that company knows that they are in violation. So the simple answer, walk the process and then give the process a chance to help you solve the problem. But if you do not lodge a complaint, if you do not seek to enforce your right, then you won't know whether it would happen or not.
Exactly. Thank you so much, sir. So we're supposed to also be proactive as employees. Enforce your rights, lodge a complaint, get the necessary information you need, and follow up on whatever injustice has been meted to you as an employee. Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. We're moving over quickly to our second speaker for today, and it's Mr. Kunle Agbola. Mr. Kunle, in the next 5 minutes, he'll be talking to us about intimidation, bullying, and harassment in the workplace. So really, intimidation, bullying, and harassment in the workplace. What is workplace intimidation? What are some examples of workplace intimidation? So Mr. Kunle, you have the floor. Let us hear from you.
Thank you so much, Omotoyosi. Please confirm you can hear me. All right, thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for having me on the panel. So I'll be speaking on intimidation, bullying, and harassment in the workplace. Oftentimes, intimidation, bullying, and harassment go together. However, there are slightly different definitions between the three. While harassment might seem like an obvious thing, many employees do not know their rights, do not understand the concept of harassment or behaviors that lead to a hostile work environment. Any unwanted or unwelcome behavior or conduct, physical or verbal, that makes a reasonable person feel uncomfortable, humiliated, or mentally distressed is workplace harassment. And statistics has shown that 70% of workplace harassment are not reported. And then what we should do as an organization, as CEOs, as HR professionals, as leaders, is to ensure that we empower employees, give them the right support, give them the confidence, give them the boldness to be able to speak up when they find themselves in such situation as workplace harassment or anything related. And also to, let employees know that they have the right to speak up when they are faced with this situation. And also that they should forget the fear, because maybe one of the reasons why they fail to report cases of harassment is, maybe they're afraid of being fired or being penalized, etc. We need to constantly let employees know what their right is when it comes to harassment. And bullying in the other parts is viewed as an act of domination of another, using force threats for the purpose of certain control or power over employees. This is common at workplace as well. And as organization, we need to continually train employees on the proper and acceptable behavior at workplace, and also put in place strategies and policies to protect employees' rights, like policies that says what behavior is acceptable, that says what behavior is appropriate at work, that says what behavior is inappropriate at work, and not only putting in place these policies, also continually communicate these policies to the employees, distributing these policies to the employees. It's not enough to create the policies and put in the drawer. Let employees continually, remind themselves of what is in the policy, and also set specific trainings when it comes to workplace harassment, often for the employees also. And harasser can be anyone, including co-workers, supervisors, customers. I've seen a case where customers beat up an employee, and because we have the rights policies in place that protect our employees' rights at MACT, and what we did was to intervene. We investigate the matter, because one of the challenges that when employees report cases of harassment, you as organizations, you as supervisors, as team leads, as leaders, what do you do? Do you just sweep it under the rug and say, well, you'll be fine, or do we take it up to ensure that these harassment cases are investigated, and do we ensure that we give proper feedback and proper documentation to the employee? That gives the employee trust, and confidence and boldness to come up to report any other case that they experience, even not for them alone, even when they experience any case of harassment on their colleagues or subordinates. And I've also seen a case where subordinate threatened to beat up supervisors as well for not adding his name to the promotion list, even though he did not meet up the criteria in terms of performance. He didn't meet the expectation, but he wanted to be promoted, and he threatened to beat up the supervisors. And then what we did also is that we investigated the matter, and there are evidences, there are written evidences, text messages, there are conversations between the supervisor and the employee. We investigated and we found the employee guilty, and it was penalized. So we need to continually ensure that we as organization, we support such employees to have a positive work environment. And harassment may include direct insults, malicious gossip, bullying, intimidation, and victimization. It could be ridiculing someone due to their condition of work or employment or organization. And this is common between the FTEs and outsourced employees. Though many organizations are beginning to realize the importance of outsourced employees to their businesses. And we are at MACT, we are working to ensure that all our employees enjoy the benefits that the full-time employees are enjoying in terms of statutory payments and in terms of insurances and etc. And at MACT, we ensure that we put in place policies to protect the employees' rights, both our in-house employees and outsourced employees. And also, we ensure that employees understand their rights when it comes to workplace harassment. What they need to do is to speak up. Like I gave those instances because they were able to speak up, they brought it to our notice, and we're able to do something about it. And if they do this, together we can make the workplace, a work environment, a beautiful place and interesting place. Not only supporting our employees even on the job, because when we talk about workplace harassment, we think that it's when we're at work alone, when we're in the office. It also happens outside, when you go out, maybe you're a salesperson, when you go out to sell, in as much as you are on duty, you are working. We need organizations need to protect every employee that is working at a particular point. Take a case, for instance, the case of Will Smith and Chris Rock. Chris Rock was at work, really, and he was harassed. His organization should be able to stand up to ensure that that case is properly investigated and treated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akunle. You've said a whole lot this morning. Even the questions I had in mind to ask you, you have addressed it. I like how you spoke about trust and the ability to recognize harassments in the workplace. I know it's important to build a culture of trust amongst your employees. They need to understand that if intimidation has happened, if bullying has happened, if there's a case of harassment, that I know the necessary quarters to turn to. And I am rest assured that when I turn to these quarters, they would be able to handle the matter appropriately, not covering it up, not putting the blame on me, not making me feel guilty or ridiculed, but following it up to ensure that the necessary people are brought to books. And you know, what we are really trying to do is to emphasize that culture of trust and transparency. It's possible, and we know that here in MACTE, our corporate culture is excellent. Even in terms of outsourcing, we do a lot of work to ensure that our outsourced staffs are treated very, very well. And so that's why we're having these conversations to say, together we can do more. You know, as a body of organizations, we can do more. We can learn to listen to our employees. Let us understand when they come to us as HR people, as team leads, as managers, when somebody comes to you to report a case of intimidation, to report a case of bullying, it is important that we shield the employees, listen to them, have an open mind, investigate the matter, and cover this employee. Employees should not be ridiculed. They should not be exposed. If they have been harassed at the workplace, it's not a topic of discussion amongst other employees. So, you know, when this culture of trust is being built, it will encourage employees to come out more, because we realize that a lot of organizations today, that employees are being intimidated and harassed. Most of them do not come out. They are afraid to come out. I know once they are sure that there's a beautiful culture on ground, they will be able to speak more about it. I love all the examples that you have given, both at the subordinate level, supervisor level. It could also be from an employee to an employer trying to intimidate or harass, and all of those measures. As we continue to further these conversations, it will be easy for us to navigate the way out and to continue to create safe and healthy work environment for Nigerian workers. Thank you once again, Mr. Kunle. That was really insightful. Please, as we discuss, if you have any questions, kindly drop them in the chat section. We will soon get to the question and answer stage, and we will take all of your questions. We are excited and we are willing to answer every question that you ask us today. Thank you so much. We are moving quickly to our third speaker for today, Mr. Wale Smart. Mr. Wale will be talking on employee education. What are the rights and duties of employers and employees as enshrined by the law? You know, we are talking about promoting employee rights in the workplace. It's also important to know that employees have their rights, while the employers also have their rights. So we're not only talking to employers. As employees, we should also know our rights and carry out those rights to eliminate all forms of harassment or whatnot. So Mr. Wale would be elaborating more on employee rights, national industrial costs, the role of the employees, the role of the employers, and all of that. Thank you so much, Mr. Wale. You have the floor now.
Thank you, and good morning. My pleasure being here. And also, let me align with Mr. Hussein to thank the MD and chairman for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I think it's a conversation that is germane, you know, and that is very important. You know, someone said, if you want to hide something from a black man, maybe not all black men now, or not all persons with black skin. If you want to hide it from them, say put it in a book that we hardly read, and it's so important. And that statement, you know, seems to be the foundation for many of the challenges that we face, even as individuals, in and out of work. Now, Mr. Hussein said, I'll refer to a bit of the things he said about concerning the law. And basically, that forms the foundation of the regulation within the context of relationship in the workplace. The labor law creates that platform where it guides the conduct of all parties within the context of the workplace. Now, it's one thing for the law to be crafted beautifully. It's one thing for us to have a policy that is well crafted, or a convention of the ILO that is well written. It is something else for those conventions, those laws are meant to guide, appropriate the provisions, the protections that those laws provides. Now, if you don't appropriate or activate those provisions within the context of your protection, then it becomes your responsibility, or you willfully, or you become negligent in actually claiming your rights. A former vice president of this country once said, he said, not all rights are right, and not all freedoms are free. So your right becomes your right to the extent of you knowing. The moment you don't know, then you passes the power to inflict pain, the power to shortchange you. You passes it to the other person who might be uncultured, quote and unquote. So everybody in the workplace, my personal belief, we all have our baggages, and it's our level of awareness of that baggage, it's our level of control of those issues that are personal to us that helps us to actually align with culture that the organization is trying to build. So if somebody is not well aligned or is not aware of his own challenges, his own how do I put it now? If he's not aware of the challenges of himself, then he will consistently be violating those principles and those policies that you have in the workplace. And that's how this issue of harassment, issue of irresponsible conduct by employers, that's how they all build up. When an employee will deliberately change another employee, or will deliberately inflict whatever kind of pain on another employee, I think it's absurd. So coming to this conversation, I will focus more on employee education, because the law is there for us to appropriate, is there to protect us. And we all, beyond the letters of employment, beyond the responsibilities that the company will have given us, the law also provides certain rights to the employees. It provides certain duties to the employees. So what are duties of the employers become rights of the employees, and what are rights of the employees, they become duties to the employers. And in summary, I also encourage our audience to take time to study this. I'll probably also share a slide with you after the program that I might share with those that might be interested. Part of the duties of an employer is to pay wages, as Mr. Hussein mentioned, is to pay wages periodically, is to pay wages in legal tender. Part of the rights of an employee is the provision of work. The employer must provide work. It must provide reference. It must provide indemnity. It must provide a safe and conducive workplace. All those are enshrined in the law. Now, looking at conventions like Convention 190 of the ILO now, that just came out that was just ratified about 2 years ago, that talks of violence and workplace harassment. It has changed the dynamics within the context of what we define as harassment now. It has changed the whole field of what is defined as harassment. Now, if those laws protect me as an employee, and I am not aware of those protections, then I've opened up myself to any kind of shenanigan by an irresponsible employer. One of the things we preach in the association, NECA now, is responsible enterprises. That as an employer, you must be responsible not only to regulatory authorities, you must also be responsible to your employees, to your stakeholders, either internal stakeholders that are employees and all other external stakeholders. It is not out of place that you find some employers behaving irresponsibly. And that is where the employees must rise up and take the bull by the horn and defend themselves. Mr. Hussein said, if you know your right and your aggressor knows that you know your right, then the chances that he will try and trample on your rights is limited, because he knows that, look, you know your right and you can defend your right. So for me, first will be employee education, understanding your rights and understanding your limitations, because all rights also come with limitations. So understand your right and understand how those rights can be defended. Either you go to the Ministry of Labor have inspectors. Look, no system is absolutely perfect. The Ministry of Labor has its own many challenges, numerous challenges. But even within the context of those challenges, you can find some level of relief as an employee. If an employer is seen to be breaching the law within the context of the Factory Act, not providing an environment that is safe for you to work, you can report all those things to the Ministry of Labor. The general perception is they will not do anything, and because they will not do anything, we are empowering those that are breaching the law to continue to breach the law. You mentioned the issue of the NIC, and NIC is also an interesting platform for all for employees to seek relief. They said two people that is living in the same house, by the time they go to court and come back, they probably won't be as friendly as they used to be, once the court has made such pronouncement. But for us, I think the NIC becomes the last resort for an employee once you realize your rights or your privileges are being trampled on. So those are information that are available to the employees, that opportunities for them to protect their rights. And also focus on the trade unions. For us, trade unions, they are social partners to us. They are a very strategic partner to our association. And one of the roles that we believe the trade union should play ordinarily, without being prompted, is the protection of workers' rights in whatever context. Now, if the trade unions are not protecting that right or those rights, then those are conversations that we can have for another time. But fundamentally for me, I think I will end this with this. As employees, there is no reason why you should not be conversant with the letter and spirit of the policies in your organization. There is no reason. You might not be able to quote the law, but you must understand the operationalization of the law within the context of your rights and your duties. If you know that and you can communicate that succinctly to your employers through your HR, then the chances of your rights being breached will be limited. And lastly, for me, I think there is a new dimension to the labor law now, and it's still information that is not generally in the public space. That the labor law is actually undergoing review now. For the past 2 years, the new Minister of State for Labor, Festus Keyamo, being a lawyer, I think he has championed the review of the labor law, and for over 2 years now, the process has continued with the social partners. That's NECA, Nigeria Labour Congress, TUC, the ILO, International Labour Organization, providing technical support to the review. And at the last meeting of the NLSC, National Labour Advisory Council, the report was that the labor law, the new labor law, has reached about 95% completion rate. The remaining 5% were issues among the social partners. Employers saying this is what we want, labor saying no, we don't want this, ILO saying look, this is what the convention says. So the harmonization of that 5% is what is going on now. Once they finalize the law, I think it's expected that it will pass to the Ministry of Justice to draft it into a bill, then presented to FEC, Federal Executive Council, for approval. Then it will now go back to the National Assembly to be ratified as the extant national labor law. And part of two highlights I would just like to share is the issue of the employer, the employee, and the worker that Mr. Hussein mentioned. It has always been a fundamental issue in conversations, even at the NIC. But the new law, has now factored in employees. No more worker. Everybody is, and once you are employed and you have a contract, the new law will see you as an employee. Even the MD, he sees the MD as an employee. So that dichotomy is out of it. And also the contract issues of 3 months, that you must give a 3-month notice. All partners also realize that employers, unfortunately, some employers, unfortunately, are exploiting that clause. In fact, we've had an issue where after escalation, where an employer will employ certain staff. Once it's 2 months and 2 weeks, they disengage all of them, they re-employ them again. So it's a sequence of evil. After 2 months and 2 weeks, they disengage, they re-employ, so that they will not issue a formal contract of employment. But the new law has taken cognizance of that. To say, look, it's now 1 month. After 1 month, an employee must be contracted, must be staffed. You must provide documents to regularize the employment of that employee. And those are conversations that are still ongoing. I said the law is still under review, and the document and its draft is still within the context of the social partner. So I'll zero it down to employee education and employees taking responsibility for themselves within the context of their career. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wale. That was so insightful. And personally, I'm excited to hear that the national labor law, that there's a new law that's been refined. And that means that any moment from now, we can expect an announcement about the new labor laws and the enforcement mechanisms that have been put on ground. Because really, a lot of Nigerian workers really do not know how to even proceed to make all of these reports for follow-up. And you really mentioned about the fact that employees need to take responsibility and need to be informed about their rights so that they can, pursue it forward. But the first question I would like to ask you is, you mentioned about the National Industrial Court. So I just want you to briefly elaborate on that. What is the specific role of the NIC in promoting employee rights in Nigeria? Are they for us? If they are for us as employees in Nigeria, in what capacity are they for us? How do we begin to engage with them? What's the process? Are we sure we're going to get positive reception from them when we start to engage them about our rights? Thank you, sir.
Well, I think the industrial court is for everybody and for nobody. So it's just like the normal high court, but just that the focus of the industrial court is basically to deal with issues that has to do with employment relationships, issues arising or in the course of employment. That if there are disputes within the context of employment, then the NIC is the first court of jurisdiction, as they say, as lawyers we say. So if there are issues, an employee feels that his right has been trampled on, and he has exhausted the internal processes of resolving those issues, naturally, what an employee should do is to approach the NIC, to request for damages or to protect his rights. It's one thing for your right to be trampled on, and it's one thing for you to know that your right has been trampled on. And it gladdens ones to know that, look, of recent, there are so many cases going to the industrial court now, and that is showing that employees are actually rising up to that responsibility of, look, I know my right and I want to defend it. That doesn't make employers irresponsible. It's possible, because I believe strongly that employers also have representatives within the context, have representatives that are employees. Like the HR manager is an employee. Like the head of legal, ordinarily is an employee. Head of finance should be an employee. And sometimes it becomes worrisome when we have people that should know also claiming ignorance, or people that should know not doing due diligence to protect their organization, and also exposing their systems to litigation. Nobody wants litigation. It doesn't, on the long run, it doesn't help anybody. The only person that will only benefit, pardon me, please, the only person that, if there are lawyers in the house, the only person that will benefit maximally will be the lawyer, will be the counsel that will have gone to represent either the employer or the employee. But fundamentally, it becomes the last resort for employees, and also becomes the last resort for employers. And the trend at the industrial court has been that most cases that goes to the industrial court, employees always seems to win, seem to have a larger chunk of the percentage of cases that are won. And that's probably because, according to the president of the NIC, the court will only interpret the evidence that you bring. All evidence that you bring up, the court will interpret it. The court will judge based on your evidence. And most times, employers fall short of even living up to the policy that they created themselves. Now, what the court will look at is, did you follow due process? And due process within this context is, if you have a policy that says, for disciplinary measures, we'll take 1, 2, 3 steps before we do the final action. The court will look at those processes. did you actually follow those processes? Sometimes HRs, legal officers, compliance officers, they become too excited about the case, too excited about sending an employee out of the system, that they breach some of those processes that they set for themselves. And once the court look at those processes and rather, look, you own these processes, you determine these processes, but you breached part of these processes. The court most times will frown at that, and most times that makes the employee to continue to win. You know, they get employee claim damages, they claim either the court will not force an unwilling employee and an unwilling employer. So most times it all ends in damages, the employee being paid a large chunk of money. So if you are aggrieved, just approach a labor, exhaust the internal processes first. And I will encourage that. Exhaust the internal processes. If there are other alternative dispute resolution mechanism that you can bring in, you bring it in. Because also I'm an advocate of don't burn the bridges, basically. Don't burn the bridges. And going to court implies on the extreme side that, look, we are burning the bridge. I don't want anything to do with you again. And human being what we are, we all part to meet again, even in the context of the workplace. So exhaust all avenue of alternative dispute resolution. If you are not getting relief from those, then you approach the NIC, especially when the action of the employer have serious consequences for your continued employment somewhere else. Then it becomes important for you to approach the NIC to clear your name first, and also get whatever relief or damage that you can get as an employee.
Now that's so good. That's so insightful. That's a very new perspective, and we're taking notes. Thank you so much, Mr. Wale Smart, for helping us to elaborate on that aspect. We are truly grateful. Now is the time to really say that anyone that asks questions, you can either raise your hand, you can raise your hand in the chat section, or you can drop your questions in the chat box, because we are now taking questions, even as we still have 1 or 2 more questions for our speaker. But now is the ideal time to drop your questions or to raise your hands. Thank you so much. Oluwatoyin has just raised her hand, and I'm going to try to unmute her now. Oluwatoyin, can you please raise your hand again? Let me see your surname. Okay, while we do that, let me take some questions in the chat box. We have one question here. One question that said that, why do some employers prevent employees from joining trade unions? That's number 1 question. Number 2 question, the same person asked is, what can employees do after complaining severally to the human resource regarding workplace bullying from their line manager? So an employee has been facing bullying and intimidation from the line manager. The employee has reported to the HR severally, and maybe because of office politics, that matter is not being addressed. What can that employee do? Like in realistic terms, what can that employee do? And also, why do some employers prevent employees from joining trade unions? I would like Mr. Hussein to please take either of the questions for us, maybe the one of what employees can do after complaining severally to HR. Then we now come back to Mr. Wale for the trade union part of it. Thank you, Mr. Hussein.
Thank you, Toyosi. Let me start off by acknowledging some of my invitees who have turned up for the session. I can see that one of our very prominent permanent secretaries to one of our ministries is on the call. I'm not going to mention names. Just to say thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to attend this session. And so I'm happy that very senior people in the public sector are on this call and are listening to what we're saying. I find that very exciting. As to the questions, why do employers prevent employees from joining trade unions? I can't answer for all employers. All I can tell you is, speaking back to what Wale has said, and I think Kule alluded to it too, employers will do whatever employers will feel like doing, so long as they know that you don't know your rights. Now, after today, you know that one of the tenets of the International Labour Organization is freedom of association. It's actually number one. It's also in our Labor Act, freedom of association. You are allowed to join any trade union of your choice. The company can't prevent you, but they also cannot, you cannot compel a company to set up a trade union. But if there's a trade union and you feel like attending or joining, the company can't prevent you. And if you're fired or intimidated or as a result, as a direct result of that, first of all, that's what that trade union is there to do, protect you from something like that. Escalate it to them, and then feel free to escalate it to yourself directly to all the avenues that we've talked about today. And again, I agree with Wale completely. Sometimes we are very shy about pursuing our rights and seeing it to logical conclusion. But I encourage you that if you look at what is happening with the industrial court now, there's so many judgments that are coming out, and a vast majority of them are in favor of the worker. What should you do as an employee if there is persistent intimidation, harassment happening, and you've complained to your HR about your supervisor acting in a particular way? Remember that the exposure is not just your supervisors or your line managers. The exposure is for the company. So if you've brought this to the attention of HR, first of all, I encourage you to make sure it's documented. Make sure you raise that complaint officially. It's documented in an official email or an official memo. If you do not get reprieve, raise it to your N+2. That supervisor has a supervisor. Your supervisor has a supervisor. If HR doesn't give you relief, raise it to your N+2. The reason is back to the point that Wale made. The exposure is the company's exposure. If this gets to the point where you have to go to the National Industrial Court, it is not just your supervisor that will be facing the issue. The liability will be the liability of the company. That's why your N+2 is likely to react. The higher you escalate it, the higher the chances that you will get reprieve or you will get an hearing. Now, what I've also noticed is that it's not just in the workplace. Bullies are cowards. When the bully knows that you're standing up to them, they back off. Usually they back off. So you be polite with it, but number one, make sure it's documented. Number two, keep raising it to your N+N until you get attention. And if you don't, do not be shy about exercising your rights by law. Those would be my response. And I found that most times you usually don't have to go beyond N+2 before everybody sits up. And the first response typically when that happens is denial. They'll back down. Oh, you didn't say, you didn't tell us. So if you don't have it documented where you actually made the complaint, then it will be a case of where you said something, I didn't know it was serious. So that's why you must make sure it's documented in an official email, and the nature of your complaint must be very clear. What you're specifically complaining about must be very clear, with dates, timing, and evidence. Once you have that, 9 times out of 10, you will get reprieve and you will get some response.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. I mean, this is so enlightening, and yeah, it's really realistic to do. Someone had also said that what happens when the HR is the bully? What should the employee do? I think these same processes also go for it. If the HR is the bully, make sure you report through a documentation. The HR probably has a higher supervisor. Document it and send the first email. If nothing is done, follow up with a higher supervisor. If nothing is still done, then exercise your rights according to the law, as has been explained by Mr. Hussein. And I also agree with him when he said that when the people involved see that you are actively taking steps and that you know your rights and you are progressing from one body to the next, everybody would sit up, because nobody wants the organization to be exposed in a negative light. Today, we are in the age of social media. It just takes one tweet, one tweet away, and then there's a crisis on the hands of the organization. So once HR sees that this particular employee knows his or her rights, and this person has not done anything wrong, they would call themselves to order immediately. So I think as employees in the workplace, it is about that time that we also begin to enforce our rights. We know what we are doing. If you did not have value, the employer would not employ you in the first place. So because you have value that you are adding to the organization, it is also important that you enforce your rights and that you do not condone any form of intimidation or harassment. Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. We are moving on to the next question. Mr. Olufumi, he has asked that, what are the signs of a toxic boss and what are the effective ways to handle a toxic boss? I would like Mr. Wale to please take that for us. Toxicity in the workplace. When your boss is toxic, what signs do you see and how do you begin to handle that kind of a boss? Mr. Wale, you're muted, sir.
Thank you, Teosi. For me, I have a bit a controversial view about this toxic conversation. You know, I think that all of us, at a point, we have a toxic trait. We have the potential to be toxic. Now, it depends on your interpretation of toxicity now. The more we become aware of that state, then the more we become self-regulated. So our level of awareness and self-regulation is directly proportional to our level of toxicity. So once you are aware totally of your own personal issues and those issues that affect other persons negatively, then your propensity to be toxic reduces considerably. And for some persons, they've been able to achieve a zero level toxicity because their level of self-regulation and self-awareness improved significantly. Now, for a boss that is toxic, I think the first thing you must realize, and these are my own views, the first thing you must realize is that anybody that is toxic have some level of personal challenge or challenges, as it were. The person, I don't want to say the person is damaged in some areas, but the person has a very high level of issues, personal issues bordering on fear, issues bordering on self-confidence, so many kind of issues that the person is dealing with. So toxicity is just the symptom of a deep-seated personal issue that boss is dealing with. Now, you can be two things. You can be two things within that context. You can either be a helper to the person, or you can either be an aggravator of that toxicity. As I said, for everybody that is toxic, there is an inherent challenge that person is facing. And that person probably needs somebody to listen. He needs somebody to give him that space to express in him or herself. Nobody, I don't think there is someone that wakes up in the morning and coming to the office and say, look, I'm going to make the office unbearable for the next person. I'm going to make the office unbearable for my subordinates. I'm going to make the office unbearable for my colleagues. I believe it's a deeper issue it's a deeper psychological issue that the person has not been able to control. So for you to deal with it from my perspective, as Mr. Hussein has mentioned, I will align with his position. If you feel threatened, either by your line manager or if an environment is threatening your peace, I think you should escalate. If your boss is the principal, you should escalate to your N2, or there should be somebody in the system that you can escalate your concerns to. If the HR is the bully, if the HR is the toxic person, then you probably can escalate to your boss and have a serious conversation with your boss. How the toxicity is affecting your productivity. Now, it's one thing to address the toxicity And it's one thing to address the person. Most times we try to address the behavior, not addressing the issues. So in addressing the behavior, we are focusing on the personality and not the issues and the damage that the toxic environment is causing. For an average person, the moment you address the personality, the person becomes defensive. For an average individual, the moment you address that you are this, it becomes defensive. And it will find other reasons to justify that behavior. But if I approach it from the perspective of, look, this situation, I've insulated you from the issue now. I'm focusing on the situation. This situation is causing this, and this for me. And these are the consequences for me. People tend to respond more or to listen more if those issues are taken out of them. And that's how you start breaking, or you start causing the process of change. Somebody shared something with me long ago, and said the principle is his own change principle, and that has worked for him in changing organizational culture, worked for him in changing the mind of management to support certain projects, and he called it the inch by inch principle. Let me share it in 45 seconds. He said a pastor was posted to a church, and in that church, the pulpit is always in the middle in most churches, but in that particular church, the pulpit was kept at the edge, the corner, the right corner of the pulpit was kept on the right corner of the altar. So a new pastor came, he saw the pulpit at the right corner of the altar, and he carried it, and he brought it to the middle, and said, look, pulpits should be kept in the middle. Then the elders of the church called the pastor and said, look, pastor, our own pulpit is kept at that corner, not in the middle. So the pastor said, no, it should be here. Then before you know it, reports started going to the headquarters, dangerous report, bad reports, and after a while, the pastor was removed. The new pastor was brought in. And once he had the story of how the last pastor, how he was let go, what he did was every Sunday, he left the pulpit at that corner of the altar. But every Sunday when he's preaching, he will move the pulpit half inch, just 1 inch. He will move it 1 inch to the left. Another Sunday, he will move it 1 inch to the left. The pulpit was moving inch by inch every Sunday. But people hardly noticed that it was moving. But their eyes was fixated on where the pulpit was. So every Sunday, he was moving it inch by inch. Every Sunday, inch by inch. After a year, the pulpit was standing in the middle. And then the other pastor came and asked him, look, this was the reason why I was disgraced out of this parish. How did you do it? He said, it's the inch by inch principle. I didn't cause the change. I didn't cause a sudden boom change, but I changed the position of the pulpit inch by inch every Sunday. And it's a principle that has worked for me and can work for everybody. If you want to effect a change, you might meet some level of resistance if you decide to do the change immediately. But devise a strategy. Some might call it local intelligence, for you to effect your change gradually, until those that should buy into that change, until they buy totally into your proposal of change. So for me, if you don't have control over the person that is the object, over the person that is the protagonist within the context of toxicity, then devise other strategies to have constructive conversation that is not focused on the person, but focused on the need for you to change, for the system to change the issue. If you focus on the person, all of us, most people become defensive and become resistant. But if you address it from the perspective of the issue without focusing on the person, then you have a greater chance of effecting the kind of change that you might want to change. Mr. Osem, I want to add a deeper insight
I was gonna add it. I was waiting. I was enjoying your I was enjoying the example you gave, very, very powerful and very graphic. But just to also add that a lot of the people who are listening on this call are young. They may not have the wisdom and they may not have the access and the reach, Wale, that you've spoken to. They're young, they are feeling this pain daily, and sometimes these environments can physically make them ill even before they come to work. You wake up in the morning, the mere thought of taking the bus to work, you actually become physically ill. So it can be a very traumatic experience to go through. So yes, everything you said it's true. It is the way to go. I would like to just flip the coin a bit and speak to young people who may be in this circumstance. The first thing I wanted to realize is, like Wale has said, you must always remember that when you meet people that are toxic, it isn't about you. In fact, 9 times out of 10, it's not just you. It is a general behavior. You just happen to be bearing the brunt of it now. Some other person has borne the brunt of it. Other people will bear the brunt of it. So it's not you. Therefore, you do not internalize that treatment. Do not take it on as a personal attack, because that cripples you. That literally destroys you. So you don't want to go to a workplace and come home damaged. So you must recognize it for what it is. This is an external stimulus from somebody, like Wale has said, who is dealing with very deep personal issues, and recognize it for what it is. Don't take it internal and make it your problem. That's absolutely key. That's a major message. The second thing is, and that's the point I was going to make, and just to add on to what Wale has said, speak up. Because what typically happens is, you think when you are being intimidated in this manner, you think if you are quiet and you don't talk, then the person will let you be after a while. No, they won't let you be. Learn to speak up, which means when somebody comes at you or somebody acts in a particular way, don't talk about so much so who the person is or what just talk about the clarity of the impact of the behavior on the workspace. This act has caused me to feel this way. This is what I'm trying to address. Speak up. Try initially speaking up privately to the individual concerned. If you cannot get the audience to get the environment to pass your message across, try and seek out who they respect in the organization and try and use that person to reach out to them. If that doesn't work, then make it official, go to their N+1. If that still doesn't work, then escalate it. But you must speak up, because if you don't speak up, you may tend to take it on and it becomes your problem. It is not your problem. You are not the issue. So don't own it and don't let it cripple you. I'm sure Kunle might want to add 1 or 2 things to it so that we don't dominate the conversation. Kunle?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Alcin. Thank you, Mr. Wale. You said it all, but I would just like to say that when it comes to bullies choose their victims for a variety of reasons. And as an employee also, you might want to find out why that person is having such attitude towards you. And you know, if the person is your supervisor or your boss, you might want to see, is that something you're not doing right, you know, that is making this person, you know, bully or, intimidate you, or, you know, having such behavior towards you. You might want to find out and address that. Or also, like Mr. Hussein has said, engage the person, because sometimes they are not even aware that they have that attitude. Some of them have it as a way of control. You know, when they intimidate their subordinate, when they intimidate, I think it's a leadership. When somebody lacks proper leadership skills, they tend to return to that tactics of intimidating their subordinates to achieve their goal, and that's not the right way to go. So, as an employee or as a subordinate, you might want to find out why that person has that attitude towards you and see how you can address. Like you said, there are protections out there for employees in-house and outside the organization. So, like Mr. Wale rightly said before now, that you need to exhaust all the channels internally before you think of going out there. But there are a lot of protection for you as an employee. Thank you.
Thank you so much from Mr. Wale to Mr. Hussein to Mr. Kunle. In fact, I've been taking notes. It's been exciting. This particular topic of toxicity in the workplace is so important, and that's why I was just enjoying it. I was telling my students that even if we spend about 7 minutes talking about these toxic bosses, it is worth it. And I really like the perspective that every one of you have brought on board, the aspect of constructive criticism, having conversations about the behavior, about the toxic behavior, not about the person, is really important, addressing the issue, right? And then Mr. Hussein said, do not internalize it. It's not about you. Right? 90% of the time, it's not about you as an employee. It's more about that person. Some things they are fighting with, some behaviors they've been struggling with that are probably not known to them. So don't take it personal when your boss is exhibiting toxic behaviors towards you, but find a way to talk to them, find a way to explain to them what this is causing you, and then there will be a way forward from there. Thank you so much, our speakers. I'm moving quickly. I'm taking 2 questions at the same time now, and Mr. Kunle will help us to answer the 2 questions. Number 1, what if your employer tells you to come to work on a public holiday? It's a public holiday Monday, Tuesday next week, and my employer says you must come to work. What can I do? And number 2 question, if an employer constantly deducts an employee's salary, what steps can the employee take to fix this issue? Constant deduction of salary, what steps can an employee do? Thank you, Mr. Kunle, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Toyosi. Talking about public holidays, employers have right to ask you to come to work on public holidays, because I'm sure in your contract of employment, you have it that the business has the right to ask you to work extra hours, which should be stated there on your contract that you signed initially for before joining the system. So it's a public holiday. You are expected to, relax at home. Especially, there's a law that also says that any public holidays recognized by the federal government should be, all organizations should be able to, adhere to it. But also, there are instances where the business will need employees to come to work, which is not all the time. And as an employee, it becomes an offense when you are not paid overtime, because the business can ask you to work extra hour, but you are entitled to overtime for that particular day, public holiday, and usually double of your normal overtime that you get normally. So employers can ask you to come to work on public holiday. And also, we should also be responsible employees also, because if you are an employee, I believe every employee should also understand the business, because we are working for the organization to, we support the organization also supports us as employees. So we should also be responsible employees. So when they ask us to come to work, what is the reason? Because most of the time, there are urgent reasons why your organization might ask you to come to work on public holidays, and I'm sure it's not all the time. I'm talking about the second question, why employers deduct your salary. It depends on the reason, because like Mr. Wale rightly said, or I think Mr. Hussein, employers must communicate to you the reason why, the reason for the deduction. As a matter of fact, you should be getting pay advice. We call it pay slip at the end of the month, before payments actually. That explains how you are being paid, that has your basic housing, transport up to your gross, and all deductions that you have, payee, NSI, NHF, out of your gross. Then also, if there are other deductions, like sometimes, especially for those who work in the factory, they use body biometrics, and you have the policy, you have the understanding that if you don't come to work for certain days for no reasons, you might not be paid for those days. Those reasons also will have to be stated on your payslip why that deduction is on your salary. And if you find yourself in such a situation, what you should do is to engage your supervisor to explain why that deduction, and your supervisor or your manager should be able to explain why that particular amount is deducted from your salary. And if they are not able to provide any solution, then you can escalate, like Mr. Hussein said. You can escalate to the person's supervisor, and the other supervisors to also ask another supervisor. Keeps escalating till you get solutions. Speak up as an employee is just speak up. You have the right to speak, and that's the truth. You have the right to speak. If somebody is not listening to you, go to another person. Escalate till you get results. Mr. Hussein or Mr. Wali might want to add to what I've just said.
I think, Kule, I think the key thing here for me is, number one, the company policy. What does it say about what the penalties are for certain offenses, especially when it causes a loss of revenue or it causes injury? That's what the law says. Evidence of a loss to the company or injury. If there's no clear evidence of that, then the deduction by definition is illegal. But when the company can show evidence of a loss, so for example, you don't turn up for work and therefore the looms couldn't get started on time, and because the looms didn't get started on time, we lost production of X volume, and therefore that goes directly to our bottom line. There's evidence, okay? Now, so that can be proven. And what does the company policy say? But if there's no evidence of your action causing a loss or an injury, and there's nothing in your company policies that says so, so maybe the supervisor now says, because you wore long trousers to work instead of wearing short knicker, and therefore you caused us damage in reputation, the reputational damage because of your long trouser or your sagging trouser. Therefore, we are going to penalize you by deducting 2 hours pay or 2 days pay because I was sagging my trousers. Nothing in the policy that says so. I didn't cause a loss. Of course, there is a violation right there, and the law says very clearly that cannot be done. So you escalate it. If they don't, please put out this and collect your money back. As to public holidays, please, for those listening, the business is a going concern. If the business collapses, you will have public holiday 365 days a year. So it's in your interest, when it's a going concern issue, that you all turn up en masse to keep the business running, even through a public holiday, so that you don't have permanent public holiday. But speaking seriously, as professionals, there will be times when you have to work long hours and you have to work on public holidays. That is not toxicity. That is not strong harming you. That is not it at all. So long as you don't even have to be paid, because there are certain levels you get to where you don't get paid over time. The issue is, how does the company deal with it? So long as the communication is clear, the reason for you doing it is clear, and it is not a permanent thing. You're not working weekends, 365 days, 52 weekends in a year. If that is not what is happening, then don't make it out to be an issue. But if it is what is happening, you're working 7 days a week, the law is very clear. Any 7 continuous days that you work concurrently, by law, you are entitled to 1 day off. Any 7 concurrent days that you work flat out, by law, you are entitled to 1 day off. That means if you work Wednesday to Wednesday the next week, the Thursday following, you must be off. That's what the law says. Now, Wale has assured us that the coming law would make sure that this applies to all employees. Right now, that law applies to workers. So technically, that's where companies hide. They hide behind the fact that you are not a worker, you are an employee. So that law doesn't apply to you. But then Kule has then pointed out, if that happens, if your company is saying that, then the issue then becomes how they compensate you. And there are many ways the company can compensate you for that particular act. So it's not every exception that you are asked for by your employer that is toxicity or that they are taking advantage of you. So let's not take it overboard completely. If they ask you to come on the weekend, find out why. And if it is for a good cause and it's for keeping the company and the clients happy, please do so happily. So you have a job. But for deductions, like I've explained, don't let anybody intimidate you. Your money is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. Thank you, Mr. Kunle, for all of that. Those were really insightful angles that you brought to the fore. I like the objectivity in which we've all answered these questions today. It's important that in as much as we are advocating for a safe workplace, for positive employee rights, we also are able to strike a balance if the organization is not functioning properly, if money is not coming in, then we have no business in the organization. So whatever issues that comes to fore, we as employees should be able to strike a balance and weigh it. Where is this coming from? Why am I being asked to do this? Why am I being punished? Is it for my own good? Am I really at fault as an employee, or have they gone overboard? If I come on a public holiday, will it affect the bottom line? Do they do it every day? So these are the questions that we also ask ourselves as employee, because as employee, we also want to be founders tomorrow. We want to be CEOs tomorrow. We also want to lead people. And so we are also able to look at it from their perspective to see that they are driving organizational growth. They are driving profit to the bottom line. And our duties is to collectively help the organization to achieve its mission and its vision. So thank you. I really agree with all of that explanation. I'm grateful for that. So we're moving to one other question quickly. There's a question here that says, if you weren't given an employment letter, what rights do you have? As there is no even written contract. So this is really an interesting one. No employment letter, no written contract, but the person is resuming to work. But what rights does that person have? Where should that person even proceed? Maybe Mr. Wale can open the conversation for us.
I think you are. Well, I wanted to check the position of the law, but my instinctive response is you are loafing around. No employment letter, no terms of contract. You are coming, you are just there, you are working. You've exposed yourself to the shenanigans of such kind of employer. Now, the dynamics will change if you are in the payroll. If you're in the payroll, then and the issue becomes a litigation, then the employer cannot defend, cannot successfully or totally extricate itself or it's from the fact that you have a contract with you, whether it's written or not. By conduct, the employer has committed himself by putting such employee in the payroll. But most times, those that will do such, I dare say they are probably paying that particular person. They are paying the person in cash. It's most likely they will be paying in cash. It's most likely such remuneration will be hidden under whether the company is impressed, whether the company's allowable cash disbursing model. So the person is not captured within the context of the regulation, because if you are captured in regulation, if you are captured in their payroll, that means they must pay the person per pension once you're on their payroll. Then they're also liable for the NSITF Act, the Employee Compensation Act, because all those contributions, even ITF, all those contributions, they are a function of a percentage of the payroll. So most times what they do is to hide under cash payment so that such employees are not captured. If you are not paid, if you are not within the context of being given a contract of employment after 3 months, you have the option of first requesting politely that you want to determine your status. What is your exact status in the business? Because you don't have a letter, you don't have a contract, then what exactly is your status? And you have to be bold about this. One of the things that works against most people is this fear that if I lose this, I can't get another one, which I think is not totally right. You have to be bold enough to define, especially young persons. If you are not close to 50, or if you're not 50, if you're not approaching 60, or if you're not approaching retirement, then your options, especially if you're in the range of 20-something to 30, your options are wide. The opportunities are just so wide for you to explore. So allowing fear that if I lose this, then I will not get something else is just undoing ourselves. So ask the HR manager that you want your defined status. What is your status in the business? If he can't give you any good explanation, then you have the option of either walking away because you are technically being exploited. If you are not paying your pension, you are not making statutory deductions from your salary. then it becomes exploitative on the long run. It's also possible that such employers, that they're probably deducting tax, deducting payee from that person's salary, and not remitting. So it becomes a whole shenanigan of a whole trend of breaking one law to cover another one, breaking one law to cover another one, and the employee becomes the victim. So ask politely, what is your status? You want your defined status, especially if it has passed 3 months. After 3 months, nothing is happening. Request politely. If they're not giving you a good explanation and they're not defining your status, you can approach the Ministry of Labor. You can write to the director of Ministry of Labor for Lagos State. I know the director is responsible. I know some very responsible officers in the Ministry of Labor that will gladly take up that kind of issues. And if you have challenges dealing with such, you can also find a way to escalate to us. We might be able to talk to 1 or 2 persons in the Ministry of Labor to assist to deal with those issues, because such employers are basically those that are giving employers generally a bad name. If someone we say employers don't do this, and it's just like you have some bad eggs within the context of the system that are actually giving others a very bad image. So request politely that you want your defined status in this place. If they are not giving your defined status and it's over 3 months, let them know the law says your contract will be formalized after 3 months. If they are still not following that trend, approach the Ministry of Labor to escalate and say, look, this is the terms in which you've been employed, and you just want some clarity and the assistance in dealing with these issues. Either of those 3 for me will be, but the first thing is just for you to get that clearance within the context of, it's possible that the HR2 is not aware of these things. The issue is just playing games, bidding to the dictates of the owners of the business. And it's also possible that the owners of the business are also ignorant of all these things. So nobody is advising anybody within the context of system. And it's just convenient to have a large pool of employees that are not contracted, and you are paying them through cash, and you are not obligated to do anything for them. It can be convenient, but once the regulators are aware, then the dynamics for the business changes, because penalties can be huge sometimes for those employers. But it takes the employee to kickstart that process of regularizing his or her employment so that the things can work normally for him and business also.
That's so good. Thank you so much, Mr. Wale. I also like the proactive measures you have also put across, as much as you have listed what the employees can do. You have also said that we could escalate to Director of the Ministry of Labor. We could also find a way to speak with you, because some employees may be in this situation, and I really want to appreciate you for all the contributions that you have made. We'll be rounding up this webinar in about 10 to 12 minutes. And so we are taking the last 2 questions. We have 2 questions to go. One question says, Mr. Sheyi Salau asked the question. It says that according to Mr. Agbola, 70% of workplace harassment are not reported. It says, can this be justified? And if yes, what are the practical measures to change or to address such mindsets among employees? Before Mr. Akunle takes this question, I just want to say that the statistics are out there. You know, on a global level, on a local level in Nigeria, we have statistics that backs up the fact that most workplace harassments, they are not reported, and that's why Tech About came up with that article. Imagine if that article that was termed tyranny in the workplace was not released. All of that exposition about a lot of Nigerian organizations that are putting out unhealthy work practices, we would not have known about them, because the workers did not report. People were just silencing it, and they were just covering it up in-house. So the statistics are actually there, and there's such a large number. So Mr. Akunle, in a few minutes, what are the practical measures that can be taken to change, to address this mindset among employees? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Toyosi, for answering the first part of it, because that's what I would have said. So practical measures that can be taken to address this, like all we have been saying since morning, is that as an employer of labor, we are trying our best to ensure that employees know their rights. And that's one of the reasons why we are here, to enlighten everyone on your rights. And we're also trying our best to ensure that you are able to speak up. And like I said before, I speak up. That's just the way to address this. When you find out this morning, speak up, speak to your line manager. If your line manager is not doing anything, escalate to HR. And if HR, some people will ask, oh, how do I report? How do I address these issues when it's the MD that is harassing me or etc. But again, we have said it all. I have said that if you have exhausted all the channels internally in getting results, there are protections out there, like everyone has said here on this panel. You can go out there and ensure that you get results. That's just how to a practical way to address it is just to speak up. Ensure that you speak up till you get results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kunle. We're moving to our last question for today's webinar. Someone says, please, what is the take of the law in a situation where an external party, like an external consultant, is in charge of the management and control of the activities and organization, like a public limited company, where the CEO has given this external consultant the authority to do and to undo? This consultant is neither a part of the board nor part of the management of the company. However, it partakes in the management and control of the company. It dictates, approves transactions, imposes transactions, controls the HR, and virtually dictates how the company should be run. So an external consultant has been given so much power, even above the HR, to do and to undo in an organization. What is the take of the law? This person wants to know what the law says about this situation, where the CEO has given an external consultant jurisdiction rights over whatsoever is going on. Maybe Mr. Hussein can speak to that for us, sir.
Okay, I'll speak to that, but I'd like to also add to the prior response. And I'm doing this particularly because I know there are a lot of very young people on this call who are looking for practical solutions. Your biggest defense against workplace harassment is knowledge and skills. That's your biggest defense against any workplace harassment, knowledge and skills. If you take full advantage of acquiring all the knowledge and the skills and become very valuable to the business, okay, you can work. So long as any business knows you can exercise your right to work, which is usually given to you by the quality of your knowledge and the value you're adding. Once they know you can work, they treat you much differently. And if they don't treat you with respect, always leave any place where respect is no longer being served. Whether it's a relationship, it's a place of work, anywhere. The moment respect starts being served, please work. That is the most powerful defense you've got. And I think that's very important for very young people. All these, oh, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. Your biggest defense is your ability to walk away. Secondly, for the anonymous attendee who has asked this question, let me make something very clear. Management does have the prerogative to appoint somebody, to employ somebody on a contract basis to help them with these activities. So you say the person is not a part of. There are different forms of employment contracts. As a matter of fact, it is actually acceptable in law to have a verbal contract. That means the contract is not written down anywhere, but there was a communication, a conversation that could prove that. So if I call somebody to come in and come and plaster my walls in my house, and the person plastered the walls and the work keeps expanding, I may not have a contract. I may not have a written letter of employment. But the fact that there was an agreement for you to come in and begin to give me services, that is tenable in law. So this consultant who has come in and doesn't have a letter of employment, but has been given a contract to serve the company, is an employee of the company. He is an employee of the company. The fact that his terms of employment are different from yours doesn't make him less legitimate than you. Now, whether there's a way that contract can be phrased to give him the power or give her the power to approve internal transactions. That is a matter for the HR department and for the legal department to determine how they've crafted that person's contract. But there is a contract that can exist that makes a contractor or a consultant, as you use the word consultant, perfectly able to deliver services, managerial, administrative services to a company, which could include supervising HR, helping craft the company's vision and mission, helping craft the company's organizational strategy, and in some cases, approving certain transactions. So the fact that they were a consultant in of itself isn't an issue. So I need to know what the issue is. Well, I've read through the question multiple times. The issue seems to be the fact that this person is an external party because they're a consultant. And I'm trying to answer that. It's always good for us to define the issue clearly so that we can respond to it. Being an external party, in quote, as you've called it, doesn't mean anything. It's just a different form of employment letter. It's just the terms and conditions that differ. And it's as valid as your letter of employment. And from what you're describing, this seems like to be a fairly senior position. And if the contract is crafted correctly, they can play all these roles that you've described, and they can play them very legitimately. They don't have to be a member of the board, and they don't have to have the same letter of employment as you have. So if the issue is that it's external, that's neither here nor there. If the issue is that they are overstepping their bounds, that comes back to exactly what the company policy says. Show where they've overstepped their bounds, escalate it to management through the ranks N+1, N+2, N+3, where they've overstepped their boundaries and how they've made the workplace impossible for you to contribute, and let's deal with the issue. But them being external party in of itself is not an issue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. I really agree with you on everything that you have said. When a company brings in an external consultant to manage some aspects, it's very normal, it's very legitimate, and it happens from time to time in different organizations when consultants come in to handle one or two aspects of the operation. So it's only if the consultant has overstepped or is displaying some toxic behaviors, like you have rightly mentioned. So that's so fantastic. We're so excited on how far we've come today. The conversations have been so enlightening, so insightful. Even as I've been speaking, I've tried to scribble down some really important points that our wonderful speakers have put out today. I mean, I know so much more than before now. I know how to go about exercising my rights, the enforcement. I love what Mr. Hussein said when he said that your biggest respect is your ability to walk away when you are no longer being treated fairly, when your rights are being trampled upon. It's important that you uphold your respect as an individual, as a professional. If the organization no longer serves you, it's important that you are able to walk away. And if you know that you are the value, and that you have something strong to offer, walking away from a toxic place shouldn't be an issue, because you will definitely get some more organizations that value your skills and your expertise. They will surely bring you on board and treat you with respect. That being said, we'll just take 1 minute each. We'll give all our speakers 1 minute each to conclude on all they've said today. Just as a way of conclusion, we'll take something from them, a word for us as employees in Nigeria to go home with, even as we begin to round up. I'll go with Mr. Wale first. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I think it's been an enlightening session for me also, and every opportunity to learn, to unlearn and relearn, I think it's always welcome, and it's also a privilege to share the stage with Mr. Hussein. I think his perspectives are always germane and very educative. And Kay, also, thank you for those perspectives that you shared. I will just throw it back to the employees. For me, it's all about employee education. Know your right, understand it, know the limits of those rights, understand your duties, because you can't fail in your duties and you are claiming rights. Understand your duties, do the things that are expected of you, and then you have positioned yourself in a good place to claim or demand for your rights. So let's take time to read more, study more, let's attend conferences like this. A lot of things I want to believe strongly that the three of us that are on the panel probably will spend nothing less than 3-4 hours each to do some level of research, before we come. Now, in 1 hour, you're having the privilege of listening to 12 hours of research by all the panelists. Listen to 12 hours of research in an hour or 1.5 hours. And those are the things that seminars, webinars like this, free trainings, those are the opportunities they give us to learn, piece together information that other experts have taken time to dig, to research, and then they present to us in few hours for us to go and follow up. So I throw it back to all the participant employees, including myself as an employee. We continue to learn, we continue to unlearn, and also we continue to relearn. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, sir. We're so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for honoring our invites. Mr. Hussein, please.
Thanks, Toyosi. Let me start off by saying thank you so much to Daddy and Mommy. I think they are on this call. Mr. Tayo Rotimi, Mr. Elizabeth Rotimi, for putting this together. This is very, very valuable. We need to keep spending the time and the effort to educate the young workers that are coming on board now, the young professionals, so that they won't go through the stress that we went through. And they do this more confidently. They go through their careers more confidently. So I can't thank them enough for pulling this together. It's truly a Workers' Day special. And to those who have had the opportunity to listen. Now, I'm going to leave you with what I said last, and I think Toyosi amplified it. After all we've said today, after your understanding of where the law sits, after your understanding of the courts you can go to, the greatest defense you have against a toxic work environment and in promoting your employees' rights is knowledge. That is the greatest defense you have. It's knowledge. You have to spend time, Wale has said it, take every opportunity to enhance your knowledge, to research around it, to read around it, to become self-confident, to be sure that anywhere you step into, you will add value. That is the biggest defense you have. I have found through my career that people who add value, who are extremely self-confident about the value they bring to the table, they don't tolerate rubbish. And when people know you don't tolerate rubbish, they won't dish it in your direction because they know you won't tolerate it. When it is clear you can walk, and you can walk very confidently because you know before you even step out of the door, there are people coming for you, then the company would not want to lose you. That is your greatest defense at the end of the day. Work extremely hard, soak in the knowledge, pour yourself into the company, learn in the process, act like a sponge, soak in everything that is thrown at you so that you increase your value and you increase your ability to walk away. That is the greatest defense you can have. If you are not taking anything away from this session, take that away. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein, for that. We really appreciate you. Mr. Kunle.
All right, thank you so much. I would like to appreciate Mr. Hussein and Mr. Wale. I'm honored to be on this panel with you. I really appreciate you guys. My message to every employee out there is that you have the options out there in those situations where you find yourself, like we have said, and you should not be subject to such behaviors such as harassment, intimidation. You have the right. Get skills, get knowledge. There are protections for employees out there, and employers on the other side has the obligation to investigate harassment cases and maintain a work environment that is free from every form of harassment, and also maintain a positive work environment. Thank you so much, Motoyosi, my colleague, for your time, and I would like to appreciate everyone also for taking time to join this webinar to listen in. Happy Workers' Day in advance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Kunle, for that. We have come to the end of today's webinar, and we want to especially over and again thank all our speakers, Mr. Hussein, Mr. Wale Smart, Mr. Kunle. Sheila was unable to join this session today for reasons that we quite understand. I'm really are appreciative of how this webinar has turned out. We do not take your time for granted. Thank you for pouring so much into us in the spirit of Workers' Day. Thank you for giving back to professionals in Nigeria. We've taken notes and we are constantly taking notes. We would go back to the books, do what we need to do as employees, as workers, also as employers. Also, we're sure that some employers listening would also act on all of the things that has been said today. And we know that as we continue to have this kind of sessions, we would continue to enforce our rights, know our rights as workers, and create like a very beautiful space for workers to thrive, to build safe places in the workplace, and to ultimately improve on what we do. And we hope that when we call you next time, you would also be able to honor our invitation. We do not take all of this for granted. And we say to all our attendees, all the participants, those who have asked a question, those of you who have stayed with us from 11 o'clock till now, we do not take you for granted, do not take your time for granted. We're excited to have you. This is MACTE. We want to do more with you, and we are always here for you. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful Workers' Day in advance. With this, we close this session for today. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.